happy mental push-up Monday. So today, guys, we're going to jump right into it. We're going to talk about today these kids. Yes, these kids. So I say these kids because I often hear, whether in my DM or, I'm interacting or working with somebody, and the question I often get is, how do I get my kids, how do I get these kids motivated? How do I get them inspired? How do I get them bought in and doing this work? And I want to remind you here that the research says that yes, these kids can be inspired, they can be motivated, and they can do the work. When they are given the work, the research shows, I don't know if you heard about the opportunity myth, you may want to check that out, but it says that when we give them the work, they actually do it, right? They do it. So I want to just dig in today and just share some tips and strategies of how do you get the kids motivated. And I'm not saying that this is the only way, this is just what I found to work for me, because this is the invisible thing that often is not in your teacher prep program, that's often not in the books, but it's essential to being a great teacher, getting kids motivated, bought into what you're selling. So let's jump right into it. The first thing I would say is check your bias. Yes, check it. And this one I think is really challenging because who wants to say, hey, I have bias? But as human beings, we do. We have experiences, situations that we've grown up in that impact how we show up in the world and the lens in which we look at things. So one of my biases was I had a story going that these kids could not do math because they need to use a calculator. Because I grew up, I took AP Calc, hell, I'm a math teacher. I mean, I know math pretty decently. But I had a story going about who they were based on the support that they need or an additional tool that they needed to be successful. And it wasn't true. These kids were brilliant. But because of my own biases, it got in the way. And so I had to make that adjustment. That was really challenging to look in the mirror and say, oh, I'm judging these children because they use a calculator. Oh, right. So that can be really challenging. But you want to check that bias because that can often get in the way in your belief of what students are capable of, just like it did with me. So just be willing to look in the mirror and say, oh my gosh, what's my bias and how is it getting in the way of me teaching my students? The second thing I would add here, I would say, know your audience. Yes, take the space to know your audience. And I would say there's two layers here that I want to discuss: compassion and values. So the first part of this with compassion, this is really just taking the time to understand another person's world. This is a muscle that I have to work on daily. That I had to work on this one because I assumed that everyone grew up like me. We all grew up like this, right? But that's just not the case. You want to take the time to really understand what is it that what are the experiences that my students are having? Who are they as human beings? Because we often hear the phrase that no one cares, kids don't, they say people don't learn from people who they don't feel like cares. So I can't remember the quote, but you know what I'm talking about. But it's really true. So really taking the time to understand who they are as individuals, right? But I'd say the second part of that is values. Taking the time to understand what is it that my kids actually value, what's important to them. So this is where I messed up because I just said, hey guys, you should care what I care about. I go in there, I'm passionate about math, you should be passionate about it too. Yeah, it didn't work because they valued something completely different. But when you take the time to understand their values, then you can get to the last part, that is selling and buying your content. Using that value of what they care about to get them to do the work. So let me go back here. Now, let's go back to values. So I heard this from Jason Gaddis in the Relationship School. He did this video one time, one of our videos, and he said, everyone, you and me included, are operating on one station. And he said, WIIFM. That's the station that all people, human beings, that's what we're operating on. And you know what that station is? What's in it for me, FM. What's in it for me? Because if I find a benefit into what you're talking about, more than likely I'm going to be willing to buy and be like, oh, I get something from this. Okay, yeah, I'll do it. So when you think about your values, you want to think about what's in it for my students. What is the value that I can, what do they care about? What is the value that I can add to them that they actually care about? They're more willing to dig into the work. Okay? And so the last thing I'd say there, once you identify what's in it for them, FM, then you just sell your content. And I'd say a big part of this last part about selling your content is bringing your full self to this, right? So I'm going to share a strategy with really quick that I use to sell my content, because I realized that my students, one of the things they value was money. Maybe they didn't care about 2x plus 6 equals 12, but one thing that I realized that my students actually cared about were those zeros. So I use that as a tool to say, hey guys, I want to help you solve complex problems. I want to help you guys solve complex problems. That's what math is all about. Hey, let's get it, because I want you to have a lot of zeros in your account. In summary, I'd say these kids want to do this work. I promise you they do. There's one thing I heard the other week. I was on LinkedIn and I saw this post and I thought it was so essential. She said, let's just stop calling them soft skills and call them essential skills. And I would say that's what all of this is about. These are essential skills that are absolutely necessary. They're soft skills is what we'd say, but they're not specifically called out, but so essential to this work. When I thought about this, I thought about my 12th grade basketball coach, Coach Lowry. And he had a lot of these things. I don't know about the bias. I think his bias was, I will not accept anything less from you. I think that's just, maybe that was just the bar. I don't know. But these two specifically really made me think about him, because he knew his audience. Like, he coached each one of us very differently, because he knew who we were as individuals. He knew our background, and he knew what it took to get us to do what needs to get done. So if Coach Lowry was like, yo, I need y'all to jump out that window right now, then we were like, okay, coach, we going. He had sold us on his vision. He had sold us on, like, the benefit to us. Like, I want to help you guys get into college. I want you to be better individuals. Like, he sold us on that. So, you know, the same thing when we think about our work, that we have to consider the same thing. These aren't just soft skills. These are essential skills to get these kids bought in, because they can do this work.